Hey, welcome in Thursday afternoon. Gabe DeArmond here. Power Mizzou Live. We're going to preview Missouri versus Kansas State. A little less than 48 hours from kickoff. This is the time every week where we zone in a little bit more on the matchup and talk about the upcoming game. Going to have a little help doing that from Kevin Fielder, who covers Kansas State here in just a few minutes. But right now, bringing in Jarod Hamilton, and appreciate you guys hanging out with us, being with us. Freeway Jarod already here, one of our regulars. So if you're here, got questions, comments, throw them up in the comments section. Jarod, what's going up? What's going on, man? You're on mute.
Man, I feel like
now I can hear you.
That's so 2020. That's so 2020 of me.
I was going to say, Jarod, we've been doing this stuff for like 4 years now, and sometimes we still got to mute, man.
Yeah, man. Sorry about that, but yeah, just finishing up the preview. Just got a couple more things I want to add to it. Getting around the bowl predictions, which is kind of hard. If y'all have noticed the bowl predictions I've done for the last couple weeks, I added a tracker last week to kind of just mark myself. It's just something a little fun. I did go 2 for 2 last week, Gabe, but okay. I don't really know what bold predictions I'll have this week. I won't just put one in there to put one in there though. Like I want them to make sense. So I'm going to think about that a little bit.
So speaking of things that don't make sense, this line started out at 3. It went up to about 5.5. It's back down to 3.5 or 4. And I understand, the line was never going to reflect exactly what people, coming off last week, I think Missouri fans have said, set the line at 30, and I would still take Kansas State. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But, I'm interested that it started low and that it seems to be moving back toward Missouri a little bit. We'll see what happens in the last, 48 hours before kickoff, I guess.
Yeah, it was. You said it started at what, 4.5?
Started at 3, went to 5.5. It's back to about 3.5.
Wasn't there a period where it was -1? Like right before?
That was some really weird thing last week that I'm not. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, it opened on Sunday or Monday at 3.
The only thing I can really think is, Vegas. Just wondering. Yeah, exactly. Vegas. Kyle says Vegas is begging people to take K-State. I feel like so many people they're leaning one way, so maybe that's what tips the line. I also think maybe Vegas is having that thing like fans do. Right after a game, they're like, the line has got to be way up here after seeing the week 2 games, and then it's been a few days, and they start thinking, well, Missouri's at home, this and that, whatever the cases may be.
Yeah, well, explain that to me because look, it's been a long time since I've bet on a game. Why would Vegas be begging people to take K-State? Because the money previously has come in on Missouri, so now they're lowering it to entice people to take K-State, or what?
I'm trying to say this right because, in my head, I know what I'm thinking, but I want to say it right. I think it's so many people expect Kansas State to win, so I think if the underdogs win, it would be Missouri, then the house wins all the money.
Right. That's what they'd like.
Exactly.
They'd be okay
exactly.
With that.
And so, I don't know, maybe lowering the odds and entices people to bet more or something on Kansas State, I guess. I don't really know.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. Kyle says 93% of public bets are on K-State. So, look, guys, I'm not a gambling expert. I don't know how this works. I just find the line pretty interesting, and the fact that it has come down toward Missouri this week. And let's go ahead and take another question because this hits on something that Jarod and I talked about in the pre-show meeting, which was extensive and lasted a good, 90 seconds or so. But does Mizzou have any clear advantage in this matchup? I mean, the short answer is not really.
Nope. And even the thing that you would think about defense, if you break down the numbers, you guys seen that article today I put out about starting fast and finishing strong on offense and defense. Kansas State, when it comes to this matchup versus Missouri, they do it all. They got the better quarterback. The receiving talent as far as receivers, it's up in the air, but Missouri doesn't use all their receivers.
Right, Missouri only has one.
So even that, the offensive line for Kansas State, that's the strength of their offense. Their defense is pretty good. It's got so many quality players there, and then special teams where like Kansas State is like one of the best historically over the last 10 years. A stat I just found was since 2013, Kansas State hasn't allowed a kickoff return for a touchdown. Since 2019, they haven't allowed a kickoff return or a punt return for a touchdown. But also since 2019, they have 5 punt returns for touchdowns and 5 kickoff returns for a touchdown. So they're like both sides, all those cases of special teams, they're really good at. Missouri's been struggling. There's just like not something I can say, well, Missouri definitively does this better than K-State.
Well, and speaking of special teams, I mean, Missouri knows all about that because they saw Phillip Brooks take one back last year that really kind of was kind of the death blow in that game. That was one of the worst games I've ever seen. I mean, that was just dreadful game to sit through. The weather was awful. Nothing about that day was like even the dinner we had afterwards, I didn't even think was very good.
It was. I got a thought that I'm gonna say for after because people may try to get on me about saying this on here. But I will say, I think that was the best food I had all season. Them and maybe Tennessee.
Oh, in the press box, you mean?
Yeah, for breakfast food, I'm not gonna lie, and it was so good to have that while we was waiting through this rain delay that never ended.
Yeah. Okay, Grant Himmelman's asking about what about secondary? Does Missouri have a potential edge there?
Okay. Cornerbacks, yeah. Like I think if we're putting it more specifically, like cornerbacks versus cornerbacks, yeah, I think Missouri definitely has the edge there. They've got the quality pieces, but the thing is, and I asked Drink this on the SEC teleconference yesterday, just about the 3-3-5 defense as a whole and how much of a problem it could cause. So it makes you want to run because you think there's open areas because you only see 3 defensive linemen, right? And then, but because they got so many people off the ball and can just basically run at you, you're playing laterally behind the line of scrimmage. And Missouri had a problem with that last year, going left and right instead of going north and south. And then the second thing in the pass game is with that extra player, I guess an extra linebacker, those 8 defenders, it makes the holes tighter to throw through. And it's not like Brady Cook he doesn't got the, a super arm. He's pretty accurate, but I don't know. It'd be tough to ask him like, hey, throw these lasers in between these little gaps in the defense.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. If there's a team in the country that doesn't need to be enticed to run the ball anymore, it's Missouri. Like, I mean, it's like it's been like 45 passes in 2 games and like 87 runs or something like that. I mean, that changes this weekend, right? Because they're not going to hand the ball off to Cody Schrader and Nate Pete 45 times and win this game.
I'm gonna tell you why it changes, but y'all not gonna be happy. It's gonna be changing
because they're gonna be
behind. There you go. Yeah, that's why I get people's frustration is why didn't they test out more things in the first 2 games to prepare yourself? Because sometimes it's okay, like to surprise everybody, but also you're not in rhythm if you haven't done none of these plays before. You haven't really passed it a lot those first couple games. You don't want to be trying that versus an opponent you really want to and need to beat.
Yeah, and I just have to think this. Look, you can make the argument they've been a little bit intentionally conservative, whatever you want to say. But if we see a team that runs the ball 40 times and throws it 20 this week, then it's time to just say this is what they are. This is what they're going to be all season. Yeah,
this is the first real test. I know a lot of y'all are going to say, but it's a Big 12 team. It's a non-conference team. This is a top 15 team, though. Mm-hmm. Like, this team is better than most teams they're probably going to play. And I'm just trying to think off my head, even in the SEC. So, like, this is a real big game. This isn't something where, it just happens to be an old rival. Like, this is a real test.
I feel like, we've been talking about what was the date? I don't even count the bowl game. So what was the date of the Arkansas game last year? Would have been like November 29, somewhere around there.
Something like that.
So we have essentially been waiting for 10 and a half months since we have 10 and a half months. No, that's not right. 9.5 months since we have covered like a real important
game with meaning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
because I don't feel like the Gasparilla Bowl against Wake Forest seemed to have a ton of meaning. The first two certainly didn't. So it feels like this is the chance we've been waiting for to find out a little bit more about Missouri.
Sure.
So with that, going to find out a little bit more about K-State, actually, at this point. We're going to bring in Kevin Fielder from EMA Online. That is our K-State site on the Rivals Network. Kevin, we do this on the fly. We just bring you in and hope you can hear us and hope we can hear you. So best of luck, man.
Well, let's start there. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So, all right, Kevin. I know you're a little bit new to covering the K-State beat, so weren't maybe in attendance at last year's game, which is honestly, it's good. It was one of the worst football games I've ever seen, and I don't care which side you were on; it just wasn't worth being at. But I'm curious what kind of the vibe and the feeling out of Manhattan is this week about making the trip over to Columbia.
I think that it's really one of those things of like, man, last year's game went incredibly well for Kansas State on the scoreboard. I mean, to win 40-12, to get a win like that against a rival, and then you throw all that out the window because it's still a rivalry game. And in college football, I think you ask anyone, they're all going to agree that it's if it's a rivalry game, you throw everything out the window. You throw all the preparation, you throw all the past history, you just throw it out the window because, there's obviously added benefit to both sides. And I think, both sides coming into this game through different lenses and, both teams coming in undefeated, playing against sort of weaker competition. And now you get this opportunity to show that, the entire year of preparation leading up to this game was worth something for either side.
Kevin, this has been a big talk for Missouri the first couple of weeks as far as just like, have they shown enough of their offense? Does it seem like Kansas State on their side, I mean, they're putting up points. Does it seem like they could still have some tricks in the bag? I mean, obviously every team will, but do you think like there's still some part of the offense we haven't seen yet?
I don't think this offense is at its final form yet. And I think that a lot of it is trying to figure out where certain things stand. This is a sort of a unique situation now in the running game where you have two really formidable backs who you have to try and find a way to get them snaps. And, it's a lot different from when you've got one guy who you can just rely on and give him 20, 25 carries a game and say, we've got our guy. This is what we're going to do on offense. But I feel like this year they're still sort of trying to figure out what they are and what their identity is. And, part of it is what is Will Howard in terms of this offense right now and where does everything sort of stand from here until the end of the year. So, I think that you've seen sort of the comings of an offense that's consistently going to put up numbers in the Big 12, but it's not perfect yet. And I don't think there's an offense in college football that's perfect through 2 weeks or 3 weeks this season, but particularly for Kansas State, this is an offense that still needs to figure out some of their issues and sort of try and find a way to get a little bit more complete as they enter into conference play.
I would argue that Washington and USC might be perfect, but I would also argue that if you put Caleb Williams and Michael Penix on any team, they'd be pretty perfect.
I think if you have Caleb Williams, you don't need to have a perfect offense because he is a perfect quarterback. So
exactly. I'm curious. Last year, I remember Chris Kleiman and K-State really building up this, hey, former rivalry, former conference matchup. We're the Big 12 trying to go represent our league against the SEC. It was something that like he was bringing in former players, and it was pretty clear. And I know a lot of Missouri fans felt like K-State's team maybe had a better understanding of what that meant going into the game than Missouri's team had last year. Is that something you've gotten any sense Kleiman is doing this year, or is it kind of like, hey, you get it from last year, we don't got to do this again?
I mean, I think you listen back to his press conference from earlier this week, and he mentioned a few times that it's still a rivalry game, guys. Like, this is still a rivalry game. This is still something that we need to win and prepare for differently. So I think that they are still sort of approaching this as, a game with proven sort of upside of like, hey, man, we're playing against a team that's a former conference mate. This is a game where we can prove ourselves again against a rivalry team. And I think that if you constantly mention the word rivalry, you're going to hype this up as a rivalry. And this isn't going to just be another non-conference game. This is a game that has a little bit extra meaning for Kansas State.
I was looking through Kansas State's defense, and Drink mentioned a couple times Khalid Duke. So first, can you kind of touch up on him? But something I'm a little bit more interested in, just kind of on the side that maybe not get as much attention, is cornerback, or maybe say, but I think it's cornerback Will Lee, 6'3". He had an interception last week, and I noticed he's a big corner like Julius Brents was for them last year. Can you kind of talk about those guys for me?
Yeah, I mean, starting on Khalid Duke, that dude's been on a tear since the beginning of the season, and he had a few pressures against Southeast Missouri. He had a few pressures against Troy, and a lot of what they're doing on defense is starting with the front seven and the play of the front seven, and that's particularly important when you consider that the secondary is still slightly inexperienced. You lost a bunch of guys last year, and you're still sort of trying to figure out. Again, going back to the offense, you're trying to figure out what the identity is of this defense and what they can figure out from the back sort of 4 or 5. And Will Lee has been really impressive, and that's important for them because they needed someone to step up in that room, and it was going to be between him and Jacob Parrish, I think, and both have impressed. But still, I mean, it's 2 games against weaker opponents, and Southeast Missouri isn't a team that should scare Kansas State any given year, and Troy is a team that didn't have a great passing attack heading into the game, and that was a team that prided themselves on running the football. And then you shift over to a game against Missouri where you are going to face one of the more talented wide receivers in college football. This is a huge test for a Kansas State secondary that hasn't had to be tested as much. There's been some moments where they've had to be tested, but in terms of like general sense of having to be tested for an entire year, this is going to be a game where Will Lee and Jacob Parrish have to step up, and they have to play high level football, or you're letting Luther Burden go for 300 yards and he's making you look silly because that's what he does on any given game.
You may have just answered my next question, but we were talking before you came on, like, we can't necessarily find any individual matchup or area of the game where we go, well, this is a clear advantage for Missouri. Do you get the sense from Kleiman or the players, like, what are they, is there something they're maybe more concerned about than other things? I mean, is there something that they highlighted other than, look, we understand every team is aggressive and multiple and blocks hard and plays hard and well coached and all that, right? But I mean, is there anything in particular that Kleiman or K-State's players pointed out?
I don't think they've mentioned anything that's like incredibly concerning, as in like this is panic button level of we need to fix this now, where this is going to become an issue against Mizzou. But Kleiman has mentioned a few times again Luther Burden, because I think that when you talk about Missouri's offense, you talk about Luther Burden and how impactful he is stretching the field vertically. And that's something that he mentioned a few times, was particularly Luther Burden being able to stretch the field vertically and getting, putting stress on the defensive backs and putting stress on a defense. But, I think the biggest thing is they want to continue to see this pass rush continue to not only develop, but find ways to get different guys involved, be able to go a little bit deeper. They're currently about 4 deep. I sort of get the sense Kleiman wants to go probably 5 or 6 deep in that room. But, I think that it's just trying to find, if they can find a pass rush that can keep Brady Cook sort of struggling and, don't give Luther Burden acres of space back. And, I don't really get the sense that there is a real concern yet, but I do get the feeling that, they're still sort of waiting for that complete performance, and sort of who can blame them, because you let Troy stay in the game for a little bit, and it's sort of hard to take anything from a game against an FCS opponent.
Would you agree that the biggest matchup would be Kansas State's offensive line versus Missouri's defensive line? That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that outside of Burden and who's stopping him, it's really Kansas State's offensive line, which is one of the best in the country and is one of the more experienced ones in the country. Then can they continue to play at a high level? Because if they can continue to play at a high level, Kansas State can sustain the ball. They can keep Will Howard in a clean pocket, and that changes a lot of stuff. So, they're still sort of trying to find, I think, the 5 that they like if Christian Duffy can't go. The offensive tackle, and there has been, Kleiman has said that he's practiced, sort of exercise caution in terms of him playing, but this is an offensive line that's got a ton of snaps under them, and this Missouri defense line, this front 7 overall for Missouri, has looked incredibly good to start the year. So I feel like the game sort of starts there, and without getting into the whole coach speak of like, oh well, every game's won in the trenches. This is going to be a game that's won in the trenches. Whoever dominates the trenches on both sides is probably going to win this game.
Kevin, David Carnell's asking if the offensive line is down 2 starters. So just give us a quick health rundown. Is it just one guy that you're expecting to be questionable this week?
My understanding is Christian Duffy is sort of the biggest question mark in terms of what this offensive line is right now. And he practiced earlier this week, and Kleiman has mentioned that they're hopeful that he can come back either this week or next week, but he hasn't really nailed down a timeline yet. There hasn't been a real, he's going to start this week. We're going to get him involved this week. It's still sort of, I guess, waiting and seeing how he feels Friday, Saturday, heading into the game.
I guess when you come into a road game as a favorite, I mean, I think we both cover teams that early in the year, we've been asking people that cover the other team, how did they make this close, right? Well, this is the opposite deal. This is K-State coming in here as a road favorite. So if they're on upset alert, like if Missouri is gonna string this thing out and make it a close game at the end, where do you see the areas that Missouri's got to exploit K-State?
I think the biggest thing is the secondary, and sort of challenge the secondary to make plays and find a way to keep the front 7 of Kansas State, which has been really good at rushing the passer, at bay a little bit longer, so that these wide receivers and you can sort of sustain a little bit more of a diverse passing attack that isn't just screens and quick passes and trying to find who's hot. If you can keep that, you sort of can, I think, maybe exploit Kansas State's defense a little bit, because I still have my concerns about the secondary. And then offensively, as crazy as it sounds, and I was looking at the numbers, and I'm equally as shocked as I think everyone else will be. Don't blitz. Will Howard seems to be the new trend. Will Howard, when he's not blitzed, is actually playing pretty well, or when he's being blitzed, is playing pretty well. But when other teams are dropping more guys into coverage and they're maybe only sending 3 or 4, Will Howard has struggled. He's thrown 2 interceptions in these situations. He hasn't completed as many passes. Like, if you could find a way to sustain pressure with 4 guys, that pushes a lot of stress on these wide receivers to get open. And as good as they've played so far, particularly Jaden Jackson and Phillip Brooks, like, this is still a team that's going to go as far as Will Howard takes them. And if you can sort of close down some of those throwing windows, then I think you could sort of get the Will Howard of where he throws that one boneheaded pass every game, and you go, all right, there's the Will Howard that has sort of plagued him since last season.
I don't think I got. You answered everything for me.
I mean, that was thorough, man. That was impressive. Do you have a feel for, if you want to put a score out there, that's fine. I never pressure anybody to put, because look, we know making predictions, all it can do is make you look dumb, right? But feel free if you want to. But what's your sense of how this thing goes? I mean, Missouri fans have spent about 4 days convincing themselves that they're going to lose by 50. But now that we're closer to game time, I think more and more of them are thinking, okay, now this is our time and we're going to turn it around and win. So just curious how you see it going.
Yeah, as someone who has had to cover FAU for the last 4 years, I'm really used to making score predictions that make me look silly afterwards. So, I might as well just do it again because it seems to be a trend for me. But I think that this game's going to be closer than people want to say it is. And I don't know what Vegas has the game at. I don't know what the current line is moving at. I really don't care either, because again, it's a rivalry game. Just throw it all out the window and, evaluate it as a one-off game, because that's what most rivalry games are. But I think that, like, as of right now, I think Kansas State probably wins, but I think it's close because this is a Kansas State team that's still trying to find itself, and they haven't had to play a weapon quite like Luther Burden, and there aren't many weapons quite like Luther Burden, but they haven't had to play a guy like him. So I think Kansas State wins. I think it's close, though. I think this game stays at sort of that 7 to 14 point range, and it never feels completely comfortable. And, it feels like Missouri at any point can go on a little bit of a run and, keep this game, make this game interesting down the stretch. Give me like 35 or 34, 28. No, 34-24 Kansas State wins. And, one of those games that the 10-point score line doesn't really feel like a 10-point score line. It feels more like a 7-point score line where, Kansas State just finds a way to pull out later in the game.
Yeah, you and I see this game pretty similarly. I'm picking K-State, but I'm picking them in a similar type of game. The only difference is you have more points than I do. Look, I've just watched this Missouri team play too much to think they're going to score 24 points, if I'm being quite honest about it.
I don't blame you there because I went back and I watched a little bit of the Middle Tennessee game, and as someone who gets frustrated watching bad football, I don't want to say that was like awful football.
No, say
it was bad football.
It
was bad football, and it was particularly just like the same mistakes that you feel like have probably plagued Missouri for years. Keep trying to plague themselves, and as someone who's watched them from afar, and remember watching what was it, the Georgia game last year, where they're like, "Oh my God, this game's close. This might actually be a thing," and then turnover, mistake, and you're just like, "Okay, well, there we go."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Kevin is plugged in. He must be watching Missouri on the side because he already knows what we've been talking about.
I covered FAU under Willie Taggart. There's enough of like bad football that I'm kind of a savant
you're an expert
on
in bad
football.
All right. Well, Kevin, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much for the time, and we'll let you go and see what happens on Saturday.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me on. And, I think it should still be an exciting game.
Yep, for sure, man.
Appreciate
All right.
you.
Have a good day. It's Kevin Fielder from emailonline.com. And look, man, I mean, I think it's good sometimes to have an outside set of eyes, right? Like his last 45 seconds there, that's pretty much what I'd say about Missouri at this point in time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And something that at first when he was talking, I was thinking, okay, he's like, there's a little bit more holes in Kansas State than obviously us outsiders who do not watch Kansas State may know, as far as like, Will Howard when it comes to, dropping, players dropping in coverage and stuff like that. But the big thing for me that still isn't good for Missouri is basically he said, Brady Cook, you're going to need to test the secondary. And you're probably going to have to test them deep, considering we've been talking about the corners. And the corners are making plays. And you know what Missouri cannot do? Throw deep. You know what they can't. It's either because there's pressure in their face or because Brady Cook has not shown that he can, at least not yet, throw the ball, deep enough. There was a couple plays last game where probably touchdowns or at least very big gains if Brady Cook can lead the ball further down the field, and he hasn't been able to do that. And so to ask Brady Cook to do that to win this game, that is not where Missouri wants to be.
Look, it's time to get somebody besides Luther Burden involved here.
They have to.
Nobody else has more than 5. Well, I think Theo Weiss has 9 targets. Mekhi Miller has 5. Nobody else has more than 2. It's time to get some of these other guys the football. So just want to kind of finish this up, running through some quick questions and comments here. And we usually keep this one to about 30 minutes, but we'll run through some of these that have built up. Will says, were you convinced by the K-State Troy game? The stat line's good, but it took a long time for KSU to look at. On one hand, I get it, but they won that game 49-13. And so,
Wait, I think it was 40-13.
40-13. Okay, 40-13. But point is, they won it by 4 scores. That was a blowout. That was always in hand. And my thing is, if Missouri had done that to Middle Tennessee, right? Like when it's 23-10, if Drinkwitz goes for it and they close that out with 2 more touchdowns and they win 37-10, it took longer than it needed to, but they won the game by 27 points. I'm not going to complain too much. That's what K-State did. I'm not saying they're great. I'm not saying they're elite. And I'm not saying Missouri has no chance. But K-State has largely taken care of business through the first 2 weeks. And Missouri came much closer to not taking care of business.
All right. Actually, I was wrong, too. It was 42-13. That was the
42-13.
But I'm looking back at the article from this morning. And because what was the question we had?
About taking a long time to look good.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Troy is a much better team. They were Sun Belt champions a year ago. So that's for one. They're better than, obviously, South Dakota, and they're better than MTSU. So, yeah, Troy, they played an all right game. But the thing is, they closed. They closed the game well. They closed how Missouri should have closed versus MTSU. And they didn't. Like Missouri's last possession. Not Missouri. Troy's last possession ended in a fumble, and that's what the reserves in. There's been plenty of times where they're getting teams off the field. Their final possessions in the fourth quarter, turnover on downs, punts, or just a regular turnover. Missouri last week, what was it? They had a bad stretch where they
had an
punted.
87-yard drive, then a safety.
They punted, safety, allowed a
touchdown. Then they did get a turnover on downs.
Yeah, they did get the turnover on downs, but the thing is, they got help again with the penalties, with the offensive pass interference. Like, they still struggled on offense. They cannot close without something going crazy. Kansas State has proven in their first 2 games that they can close. And usually I would say, well, the competition was lesser, but the fact that Troy's the best opponent out of all the games these guys have played, and they handled them pretty well, I mean, that should say something.
Yeah. Kyle wants to know, do you think we start a new right guard? Look, can I just say, Drinkwitz said he had 8 or 9 guys he thought could start on offensive line. And now we're talking about Cameron Johnson, who pretty clearly is in the crosshairs to get replaced. If he does get replaced, he's getting replaced by Marcellus Johnson, probably, who had 2 penalties and 15 snaps. Like, where's the depth, man? Because those are the only guys that have played. I'll be honest, I don't have a clue why EJ and Doma Ogar can't get on the field. I don't know what it is.
Unless that injury from last year is still lingering. I know he's healthy, but sometimes, you can be healthy and maybe not shake back, to what your form was, because he was playing really well before he got hurt. I don't know, but like we were talking about this after Drink's interview on the way to talk to Chuck Hicks, because that's all we got. You was talking about it was his year 5 or 6 for EJ. I can't remember, but he's been in college football.
I think 5.
Yeah, he's been in college football for quite a minute, and Drink said he's a work in progress. Like, that doesn't look good. And then when I went to practice, maybe he was out there, but I definitely seen Cameron and Marcellus like kind of switching with the first team. So that tells me those are the 2 guys who were mainly considered for the job.
But what's weird to me is he played because of an injury last year, and he was actually good. Like, they were better when he was in the lineup, and then he got hurt and all that. Now, I don't know. It's very strange to me. G2 South wants to say, both of you have been appropriately critical of the play calling. If you're the OC, what are you changing about the offense? Look, I'm throwing more, and I'm throwing more on first down. That's the biggest thing I'm changing.
Throwing more. I think they definitely got to start putting stuff on. Go back to the Wildcat a little bit. Do something like that. I mean, short yardage, you got to have a different package. Use Logan Riker. You literally call him Big Show. Do something like that where you can get these short yardage things going. Like you said, pass some more. And if you see teams blitzing you, how about you get in the 5 wide and get your quick passes going that way? Spread the defenders out. Yeah. Stop. Like, they're just so predictable that there is no way me and Gabe should know every single time they're gonna start the game with pistol single back formation to Cody Schrader. I can't take it no more.
Let me ask you this: because I don't remember it happening. Maybe it's happened. Do you remember him running option at all with Brady Cook?
I'm sure they have, but I can't think of it.
I hate seeing a little speed option with Brady Cook.
Yeah, he can do that with him and Pete. But yeah, I think that I mean, why not? They've got to. Their offense feels vanilla, to be honest.
Yeah,
like they've got to do something.
Yeah. All right. So that, I feel like, covers it. I mean, we have been talking about this game for a long time because it's the first one that matters. Jarod will have his prediction up tomorrow morning. I kind of gave you a sneak peek at mine. I think this is going to. I think it's going to be a good game. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But like, I want to see a good football game.
Me too. First sellout in Eli's tenure. But even what Kevin just said about everything that like Kansas State still has to work on, he also said like over there they're not really pressed about anything Missouri's doing. That's just like, we've got to watch out for this. We basically talked this whole podcast about Kansas State's line, their defense, their scheme, position players, special teams. Like, there's a lot of things for them to worry about. So,
well, I mean, Kansas State has been better this year. It was better last year. I think we're all under the understanding Missouri is going to need to play a much better game than it has played so far to win this game. But I don't think this is a game where you go like when Georgia came in here, if Georgia played an A game, nothing Missouri could do mattered. If Kansas State comes in here and plays an A game, I don't think they're so talented that there's nothing Missouri can do about it. I mean, I think K-State's a better team, but there's no reason Missouri can't play with this team at all.
But here's the thing. If Kansas State plays the A game, it's hard for me to imagine that also means Missouri is playing an A game at the same time.
Right. And it's going to take an A or a B game to win this. No question.
Freeway Jarod said they ran speed option in the bowl game versus Army and Brady scored. So what is that, 2 years ago?
Yeah, do that again.
Oh, okay.
I was at that Army game. I've completely blocked it out. So, but no, I mean it's going to take a good. Missouri's not going to win this with a B- or a C+ effort.
No.
But
can they make it close with that?
Not if K-State plays an A game, I mean, but point is, hey, this is we have seen a change in this fan base. This is put up time for Eli Drinkwitz. Show you can get this team ready to play and play well in a big game.
Yeah, they got to pull this one out, and all three phases of the game.
Yep.
I don't remember last year if there was another team they played where it was just special teams was this important, except when they played Kansas State, and it's coming back again. So they can't be affording these missed PATs, these missed field goals, whatever that issue is. This is the point where you said after the South Dakota game, this will cost you games.
Yep. I think Kansas State and Virginia Tech should play in a bowl game, and they should only be able to punt and kick, and they would just block each other's kicks all the time. So, but anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out with us. 11 a.m. kick, so we're going to be over at Faroe by 9:30 on Saturday morning. Preview in the chamber and everything tomorrow. So, thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you next time.